Okay, great. Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for today's webinar program sponsored by Massachusetts Peace Action. Massachusetts Peace Action is a local anti-war peace group here in Massachusetts. So today we are really excited for our webinar program with Sabrina Salvati, who is a local activist and podcaster and journalist in the Boston area. And we'll also be joined today in discussion with Jill Stein. So the three of us will be here. I'm here right now in the Community Church of Boston. This is Dean Stevens, and this is a very historic, great church. So before we get started today, Dean is going to kick us off with a song.
Hello, everybody. Dean Stevens saying welcome. And welcome to this space, which is Community Church of Boston. We call ourselves a peace and justice congregation since 1920. And we have a remarkable history, and we do it every Sunday morning at 11 o'clock Eastern Time. I hope you will join us. You can find out information about us on our website, communitychurchofboston.org, or on our Facebook page. We have a different speaker every Sunday and a lot of weeknight programs as well. I want to start with a song called Solidarity. Tom Pacheco is a friend of ours, has played here many times, and here's his song. For the people who stand up and march for their rights, solidarity, solidarity. For the ones who shine lights through the perilous night, solidarity, solidarity. For the souls who risk everything, strong in their stands, so their children can have a fair chance. Power in unity, fighting for what can be, solidarity, solidarity. For the workers who strike for a real living wage, solidarity, solidarity. In a time where the rich rule this new gilded age, solidarity, solidarity. Where so many have nothing and a few have it all, what your grandparents fought for recall. Hear their proud voices ring in your memory dreams of solidarity, solidarity. For the crowds that have gathered and filled the town square, solidarity, solidarity. With hope in their hearts and their hands in the air, solidarity, solidarity. They sing down all dictators, calling their bluffs. When you've had enough, you've had enough. Every fear will recede in this great human sea of solidarity, 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 solidarity. Where is that harmonic?
Great. Thank you so much, Dean, for that song. Wow, I see everyone clapping. Thanks, Dean. Dean was just giving us a tour today of the whole Community Church of Boston. There's thousands of books here and a lot of history. We were looking at tapes, recordings. Rosa Parks has spoken here. Dr. Martin Luther King. It's a very historic place. I feel so honored to be speaking from here today. Thank you to Dean and all the Community Church of Boston and Crystal for hosting us for this event. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce Sabrina. Sabrina is the host of the Sabby Sabs podcast, which you can find on YouTube. And she's local here in Massachusetts, activist and podcaster. Sabrina, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me on.
Great. And Jill Stein is with us as well. So we'll be bringing her in shortly and having a discussion. So Sabrina, to kick us off and get us started, can you tell us a little bit about yourself, who you are, how you got interested in politics, talk about your podcast and what do you do, what topics do you cover?
Absolutely. I actually am an educator. I've worked in higher education and I've also worked in K through 12 education as well. I actually saw a lot of disparities in the education system that I was really passionate about, that I actually believed I could change from within the inside of the education system. And I found myself just growing really frustrated when I realized that I wasn't going to be able to do that. And I think that's kind of what led me into my political awakening, discovering Bernie Sanders. The message that he was sending across the nation really grabbed me and really spoke to me. But I've grown, I would say, over the past year or so, tremendously um, upset a little bit with Bernie Sanders as well and the two-party system. So I actually started off really writing these long passages on Facebook about the two-party system and how it's corrupt because of the money that's attached to it. And it was actually a friend of mine that told me that I should probably put that on YouTube. So that's actually how I started Sabby Sabs podcast. And I started off interviewing progressive candidates that were running for office at that time and newer ones as well. And after Force the Vote, that was when I started to lose hope and faith, I think, in progressives going into Congress. So I started to shift my focus and focus more so on the class issue, heavily on the problem with the two-party system, why they are not able to change things from within inside and how it is corrupted. And along the way, I actually met Nick and Rome and CJ and JB at that time. They had started a podcast and they asked me to join. So that's actually how I became a part of Revolutionary Blackout Network.
Great. That's awesome. Thanks for sharing that. I think a lot of your comments about the two-party system and feeling political disillusionment, I feel like I can relate to that. And a lot of friends and people I talk to, I hear a lot of similar things from people of all ages. So I hope to talk more about that tonight. Could you talk a little bit more about this Revolutionary Blackout Network? Who are you guys and what do you guys do?
We are a group of Black activists. We actually met each other on Twitter, of all places, believe it or not. Some of us actually canvassed for Bernie Sanders and AOC when they were running for office. We focus a lot on, again, the problems with the two-party system, the class divide that we have in this country, the policing system that we have and the criminal justice system. And we also talk a little bit more about education as well, just how all of these systemic issues that we have in this country, how they're actually all connected. And one thing we really need to pay attention to is it's not so much about left versus right. It's more so about, as Bernie said, the 99% of us that versus the 1% of us. And that's where we really want people to shift their focus, that there is a reason why things operate the way that they do in this country. And the more people understand about the money, the donors that a lot of these politicians have, the more they understand why they pass legislation that they pass, why they have the talking points that they have. And we also focus on the propaganda that is coming from mainstream media, which I feel is incredibly dangerous.
Yeah, exactly. And that's why it's so important that you guys are doing what you're doing, independent media and distributing information in different ways outside the mainstream media, because the mainstream media or the corporate media or the establishment media, whatever you call it, it's very toxic and a bad source of information. So what has the response been from your podcast? What's the response been?
Most of the response has been very positive. A lot of people have reached out and have told me, thank you so much for your voice. Thank you for telling the truth and just being real. There have been some negative comments, but it's usually vote blue, no matter who, crowd that sends those messages my way. I think that some people just really don't want to hear that you're really not getting a positive amount of energy from either party. And I think some people don't want to hear that, especially if you were raised to be Republican or you were raised to be Democrat. I was a Democrat when I was in undergrad, and I really believe that the Democratic Party was the party for the working class and was the party that was actually going to represent minorities. And as I've gotten older, I realized that both of these parties are owned by Wall Street. Even when it comes to the Democratic Party, they don't really do anything to help Black communities. They will virtue signal, they will give us a Juneteenth holiday. But if I go back to my family's neighborhood in Baltimore, the schools are still a mess. The housing issue is still corrupt. They haven't really fixed and improved anything. And when they do try to revitalize these communities, the people who grew up there are pushed out because of gentrification, because they can't afford the rents in that area. So what I really strive to do is to educate, particularly African Americans, that the Democratic Party isn't going to help you either. They haven't helped us all this time. And it's really frustrating to me that someone like Joe Biden, who co-wrote the crime bill, is being praised by so many of us as if we can't see the problems that he's had from his past.
Yeah, exactly. And that's true with the crime bill. That's also true with the Russia-Ukraine NATO situation. I was listening to Scott Ritter the other day, who was saying Joe Biden is totally compromised because of his previous relations with the Ukraine and his son being on Ukrainian gas Burisma. So Joe Biden is totally compromised to be leading our response to all of this. Anyways, I'm at the Community Church of Boston right now, and you see behind me there's a banner. It says all races, all religions, all cultures, all genders, all orientations. So I really like this atmosphere. I'm so glad to be here. I want to bring in Jill Stein. Actually, the first time I ever met Jill Stein was right here at the Community Church of Boston. Every year, CCB has a Sacco and Vanzetti Award that they award to someone. And in 2021, they awarded it to Julian Assange. And Julian Assange wasn't able to be here because he's in captivity, he's in prison. So Julian Assange's brother and father, the Shiptons, they were here, and I was fortunate to be able to interview them. And Jill spoke here as well. Jill, welcome. Do you have any opening comments or remarks you want to kick us off with?
Yes. I mean, first, a big thank you to you, Amar, for organizing this, and Mass Peace Action for hosting, and to Dean Stevens and Community Church for your wonderful inspiration, and especially to you, Sabby, and to the whole Revolutionary Blackout Network, because you are being the real media. You are filling the void here, which is absolutely critical, not only to dealing with this explosive war situation and the warmongering that's going on, and the push for a hot war, and to expand that hot war going right up to and including nuclear war. And what's going on in mainstream media is it's a crime, and it's an absolute betrayal of their responsibility to educate the electorate. And I really relate to what you were saying about being an educator and realizing that it's actually the whole public that needs educating. So it's really great that we have an educator who's using media for what we absolutely rely on it for. And, so I just want to start off by saying how grateful I am to hear to hear these really powerful truths being spoken by this wonderful, independent, largely millennial Gen Z type, and people from communities of color who are not compromised as part of the, the driving force of the empire, but rather, clearly victims of the empire, which is coming back to bite all of us. And it's just so inspiring to hear you guys and you on a daily basis, and to hear you debunking the this psyops, the psychological operation which is being waged on us and the rest of the world through mainstream corporatized, consolidated, sold out media that's basically reciting the talking points of empire and the defense establishment. I mean, it boggles the mind how people can buy into this after one disaster after another, including most recently Afghanistan. But each time we get goaded into war by these by these propaganda campaigns. And that's being waged right now. And, I hope tonight we can get to talk about that a little bit, because this is not only like a grand problem, it's like an immediate problem right now that we're really on the verge of this exploding war. And the truth is being suppressed. We are being censored. We have truth tellers, who are being deplatformed and silenced and ridiculed. And it's extremely dangerous. We are all in the target hairs on this. So, it's really important for us to support you as independent media and support all of the activists here, who are part of this pushback to educate people and bring the reality, to light, that this is really a long-standing proxy war between Russia and the US, and we are being manipulated and goaded into essentially regime change, as Biden himself has, directly stated on a couple of occasions in the last week. So, nothing could be more dangerous than where we are right now, with 2,000 nuclear weapons on hair trigger alert, and two political parties and a media establishment, both mainstream and many of the so-called liberal media, who've been just, who've bought into this, who've drunk the Kool-Aid, and who are really afraid to stand up. So I want to just thank you so much for your courage to just, tell it like it is in the face of all this, really vicious resistance that's going on right now.
Thank you, Jill.
Yeah, thanks, Jill. And the reason I brought up Julian Assange was because I was thinking it's so good that now we have independent media and alternative media sources, because the corporate media, they were not. And matter of fact, the whole reason Julian Assange was such a big service to the whole world was because he was sharing information with us that was being hidden from us by our political and media establishments, war crimes and corruption and all types of things. And because of that, he's being persecuted now. By the way, Jill, when I met the Shiptons here, it was heartbreaking because they were such gentle and nice people. And to think that their brother and their son is being kept away from them. What's happening to Julian Assange is actually a form of torture. They're torturing Julian Assange because he did the right thing. So it's good that Sabrina and Revolutionary Blackout Network and everyone, they're giving us alternative sources of media information, because we're not going to get that information from our corporate media. Yeah, so Sabrina, do you have any comment on any of that? I know Jill said a lot about the two-party system. And by the way, speaking of the two-party system, it's so interesting that there's this like seeming dichotomy, but they're both on board for the Pentagon budget, the ever increasing Pentagon budget. They're largely on board for foreign policy, except one party might argue for more hawkish foreign policy than the other. Sometimes it switches, whatever. Sabrina, do you have any comments on any of this?
Correct. Both parties are pro-war. And I've gone through this with 9/11, and I feel like here we are again. I want to say, in reference to Julian Assange, it is very scary what's happening to Julian Assange. And one of the criticisms we've received sometimes from people on social media is, why do you keep talking about Julian Assange? And I want people to understand that this is about freedom of information. This is about freedom of press. And if they can take down someone like Julian Assange, they could take us down as well. We just saw recently Chris Hedges has been removed from YouTube. Lee Camp, Abby Martin, all of her videos are gone. So they are really trying to silence voices that go against the mainstream media narrative. And there's a reason why networks like CNN and MSNBC and Fox News have the talking points that they have. And I think a lot of people now are starting to wake up to that. But you have to ask yourself, why do they have that narrative to begin with? You have to look at who owns these networks. I know that AT&T owns Warner Media Group, but AT&T's shareholders consist of Vanguard and BlackRock. That's important for people to know. And I really wish that more people would do that, like follow the money. Where is this all being funneled from? So I think that's really important. And this is why we have the talking points that we have, and they will continue to try to silence anyone that goes against the narrative.
Yeah, Right. So, I mean, speaking of the political, there's a lot to unpack there. But speaking of the political system, I was asking a lot of friends in anticipation of today's webinar, like, what should I ask Sabrina? What should I talk to her about? And almost everyone was like, can you talk to her about her critiques of the progressives in Congress? Where I work at Mass Peace Action and in the broader like progressive, like left community, whatever, there's a lot of people who feel like that these progressives in Congress, the so-called squad, that this demonstrates something new, this is something hopeful, and people want to invest in this as a form of political change, to get more progressives in Congress and of the same type. And by the way, I actually want to talk about the Amazon Labor Union and AOC later, but I'm just saying, I think, Sabrina, from what I've heard on your podcast, your view might be a little bit different. So can you talk about that, your thoughts about progressives in Congress?
I, for one, was a huge supporter of the squad when they were running, when they won. I was incredibly excited and supportive, but they have not followed their campaign promises. They don't vote that way, and they don't speak that way when they have interviews on TV as well. And I think when I look at an issue like defunding the police right now, Cori Bush stands alone. She's the only one willing to speak out against it, and they're trying to silence her. They don't want her to talk about it. Nancy Pelosi said the Democratic Party is not moving in that direction. The problem I think that the squad is running into is that they went into a party where the entire party is owned by Wall Street. Even though they took grassroots money, the Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, takes corporate money, and she's the one that's running the show in the House. And so in order for them to have a political career, they have to do what Nancy Pelosi wants them to do. They really got to be on her good side. If they want committee seats, if they want these chair appointments, they have to go along with Nancy Pelosi. Now they're at a crossroad. Some of them, when they ran, they said that they didn't want to be a career politician. I think we see that's not the case so much anymore, particularly with AOC, who definitely does want to be a career politician. And I think that when you have an event like Force the Vote during a pandemic in this country, and not one of them was willing to attend the town hall, which had over 1 million views, not one of them was willing to force the vote against Nancy Pelosi for Medicare for All. That right there said something to me. That told me that they were really not going to fight and push these issues. Even after Force the Vote, I decided to give them a second chance. And then there were all these other bills that came through, the bill to increase the funding for Capitol Police. They pushed that through. The $15 minimum wage, where was the leverage? When we go into all these chances that they had to really use their leverage together as the squad, they chose not to do so. Max Blumenthal interviewed Cori Bush at the Capitol, and he asked her, why didn't you guys force the vote? Cori Bush's response was, that's Bernie Sanders and Pramila Jayapal's bill. But you knew it was their bill when you ran and you said that you would fight for Medicare for all. So that tells me that there's something else going on here. I think there's a lot of pressure in DC. I think it is incredibly difficult to fight back against these politicians that have been there for years. And I think that Cynthia McKinney had a good point about this. When she came onto my show, Cynthia McKinney said, not one of them in the House is willing to go to the mat and actually fight for the people. Not one of them. Everyone says what you want to hear when they're running for campaign, but when they're there, it's a different story. No one wants to be ostracized. No one wants to be left out of the circle. So I think they're going along to get along. And it's unfortunate. It really is. But I hope this is a wake-up call for everyone. And this is why I keep telling people, you are asking them to go into a party that is owned and controlled by Wall Street. They are not going to take over this party because Wall Street is not going to let them dismantle this group. The Democratic Party is an organization, it's a corporation. And I want people to really understand. So yes, I think that they had really good intentions when they were running, and I think they did want to fight. And then they got there and they realized that's not the way you play the game. And even now, there's all these excuses. There's all these excuses as to why they can't fight for something. AOC with the event for Amazon, you said you were going to be there. You did not show. How do you just ghost the workers? If you're really for the working class people, why were you not there? And then we see you go to these events like the Met Gala. You can go to that and you can take pictures at the Met Gala, but there was a protest going on right outside the Met Gala. Why weren't you out there with the people? So I think people really see like what's happening here. Like, do you want to really fight for the people or do you want to be a celebrity?
Yeah, and Sabrina, can you talk a little bit more about the Amazon labor union story in case people don't know what happened with that, and expand on the comments you were alluding to?
Absolutely. Chris Smalls actually came onto my show about a year ago. At that point in time, he had been fired from Amazon because he was trying to organize the workers at the Amazon location in Staten Island. They were not being treated well during the pandemic. They didn't have PPE. There's a whole story that goes along with this. But to make a long story short, he wanted to organize the workers and help create a union. And all this year, and actually a couple months before, that's what he's been doing. He's been traveling across this country. He tried to organize the Amazon workers in Alabama. He's done protests at Jeff Bezos's homes. He has many of them, by the way. And it's been a hard fight. And finally, they had a vote, and the vote went that way, that yes, the workers decided they're going to unionize. So he created the first union, Amazon union in the United States. There was an event a couple of months ago at that location, and AOC was supposed to be at that event. This is something that she said that she would do. The day of the event, AOC didn't show. She just ghosted them. And Status Quo, Jordan Sheraton from Status Quo was actually there that day on the ground. So he has a video about all of this. But I don't think she really understands how disappointing it is. They were really counting on having her there. And she has millions of followers on Twitter, and that really could have brought a lot of people out to that event. The problem is the squad, they're not using their platforms to really organize people and push people in this country the way that they could and the way that they should have. Last summer, we had marches for Medicare for All in over 50 cities across this country. They didn't even want to tweet about it. It's incredibly disappointing. I think the only one that was able to attend was Cori Bush. She went to the one in DC, but even then there, she didn't want people to interview her. And I just don't understand why they could not have put that message out there. Now, those marches were great, but we could have had a lot more people if one of them would have even just tweeted about it. So it just seemed like, to me, all of a sudden, Medicare for All was not important. They started to change the terms and mention access. Now it's an election year. Now they're talking about Medicare for All again. So there were all these different opportunities where you could fight for the people. And it just seems like to me that once they got into the House, all that activism that they did on the outside, it just disappeared. They just stopped fighting.
Yeah, right. And speaking of the Amazon situation and AOC, she represents a congressional district where a lot of Amazon workers live, the same workers for the warehouse where they were trying to unionize. So she didn't, as you said, she didn't show up when they invited her, but after the fact, she tried to kind of support it on Twitter. And people are calling her out that, well, we asked you to come support us when we needed it. And she wasn't there for that. Jill, do you have any response or comments in regard to what Sabrina's been talking about?
Sure. Yeah, no, I really want to underscore what she said, especially about the party being controlled by the big money. And this is, of course, true for the Republicans as well, but they don't really pretend otherwise, and the Democrats do. Supposedly they're small donor funded and working for some high progressive agenda. But in fact, if you look at the money, the numbers on this run by Open Secrets, for example, which analyzes all the campaign finance data, they show that, well, number one, the money pouring into elections is going off the charts. It was around $6 billion in 2016, and it was about $14 billion, so more than doubled in 2020. And the percentage that comes from small donors, which they technically define as under $200. That's not so small in many people's books, but that's where they draw the line. And even there, it's only 22% of the money So it's a small portion of the money that's coming from these smallish donors. Most of it is coming from donors with very deep pockets. And a lot of that money goes directly to the national party committees, that is to the DNC and the RNC. And they have this thing that you don't hear very much about called the victory funds. So there was the Hillary Victory Fund, there was the Joe Biden Victory Fund, the Trump Victory Fund, et cetera. And if you're a big donor, you know how big you can write a check for? You know, for both Trump and Biden, it was around $600,000. So you as a sole donor can write a very fat check. And some of that is distributed, but the parties, the state and the national parties can all redistribute the money however they want, including to the party committees. So it's all a scam. It's a big scam that campaign finance is carefully controlled and watchdog. That's really BS. I mean, and we know that because of the role, the absolutely outsized role being played right now by super PACs and by dark money and by these party committees. But to the point Sabrina was making, that the party bosses are really joined at the hip with their big money donors. And that money is used then to manipulate the electeds and also the candidates. And in fact, part of the reason, the Democratic Party has been marching to the right, as the Republicans have too, but within the Democrats, they elect all these, they pour money into the likes of, what's his name, Jamie Harrison, a lobbyist for coal and tobacco, who was the candidate, where was it, in North Carolina, I think, for Senate, I believe, one of the biggest funded Senate races in history. And, he still didn't win. And they fund their milquetoast Democratic candidates so that they will defeat progressives in the primary as well. So that money is coming from deeper and deeper pockets, and it's used to drag the party and its candidates increasingly to the right. So it's no surprise that the Democrats, they lost 1,000 seats in state legislatures over Obama's term, I believe, because what did Obama do? He bailed out the banks, he bailed out Wall Street, he threw 9 million homeowners under the bus who lost their homes. Clinton and Obama were all part of NAFTA and the offshoring of our jobs. So Democrats have gotten a horrible rap, and it's absolutely no surprise. And then they run these totally milquetoast candidates, and more of them get elected, who, for example, after the 2020 election, I forget her name, but one of their former CIA candidates who said, don't you dare mention the word socialism again. She wanted to blame socialism on the poor performance of the Democrats. It's not their socialism, it's their anti-socialism, that gets them in trouble, and all the bargains that they make with the devil. So what we're seeing from the parties is exactly the opposite of what we need. And the last comment I want to make is that our struggle really depends on our energy in the streets, on the social movements, and in my opinion, it depends on also on holding power accountable. And to do that, we really have to challenge them in the halls of power. And that means independent political parties. And by independent, I mean parties who don't take corporate money or large contributions, because it's only those parties who can represent everyday people and who are not basically bought and paid for. Yet the Democrats, the Republicans don't pay any attention to a democracy reform agenda. The Democrats and the progressives make a lot of hay out of their democracy agenda. But what is their democracy agenda? It's basically about shoring up Democratic Party votes. And yes, we need to end voter suppression. Voters need a guaranteed right to vote, but you also need a right to choose who you can then vote for. Because if you just have a right to vote for candidates who are sponsored by the war industry and the fossil fuel giants and big tech and the insurance companies and big pharma, if they're all representing the same powerful interests, you don't have a choice. That's not a right to vote either. Ranked choice voting and proportional representation and fair access laws to the ballot should be a part of that agenda. And it's absolutely outrageous that the Democrats make this big charade out of advancing voting rights, but it's really not voting rights. It's a very limited, fake voting rights agenda. So this can be fixed, and it's really important that we fight it on all fronts, politically and in the social movements as well.
Thanks, Jill, for those comments. I want to take this moment to just mention we're having in May, I forget the exact date, in May, we're inviting on Margaret Kimberly at Mass Peace Action webinar to discuss her book, Prejudential, Black America and the Presidents. So I want to invite people, if they wanted to read this book and join us for that book discussion, that's happening in May. I'm going to take a second to read something from this book. In the very beginning of the book, in the preface, right here in the very beginning quote right here, it's a quote from W.E.B. Du Bois. He said, this is the quote: "In 1956, I shall not go to the polls. I have not registered. I believe that democracy has so far disappeared in the United States that no two evils exist. There is but one evil party with two names, and it'll be elected despite all I can do or say." So that's so interesting because he said that in 1956, and I read it and I thought, wow, that's how I feel today in 2022. So yes, I invite people to read Prejudential, Black America and the Presidents by Margaret Kimberly. We're going to have a book talk with her. We also just recently, we had a book reading club. We read War with Russia by Stephen Cohen. War with Russia, by Stephen Cohen. He's a legendary scholar of Russia, spoke Russian, lived in Russia. He was a CBS News correspondent for Russia for many years. This is a collection of his essays from like 2014 to 2018. It's so fascinating. He is, he's like worried about like what's happening in Ukraine right now. He was like calling it for years. He said the US policy is going to instigate exactly something like this by trying to bring Ukraine into NATO and moving these missiles closer and closer to Russia's borders. In the US media, we hear constantly that Putin is aggressive. That's the word that's constant. Biden says it, it's from the top down, Russian aggression, Putin is aggressive. What Stephen Cohen is saying in this book is very different. What he's saying is that Putin is actually a legitimate statesman with legitimate concerns for his country, and that the US is provoking this and they're causing what's happening right now. Sabrina, do you, well, there's a lot I want to talk about. What's it been like for you covering foreign policy, and what is the response been? You've been doing a lot of great, I've seen Caleb Maupin on your show, and a lot of great foreign policy coverage. So do you want to speak on that for a little?
I think foreign policy has been incredibly difficult because so many people believe mainstream media's talking points, especially with Ukraine and Russia right now. I've seen so many people defend funding Nazis abroad. And I talked about this last night in reference to Zelensky. Now Zelensky is telling Joe Biden that the money and the aid that he sent them is not enough, that he needs more. So now we have Zelensky making demands to the United States government. And this is just going in the wrong direction. And I don't think we should have gotten involved in this. All of a sudden, the United States government has all this money to give to another country. But when we ask for simple things here in the United States, such as universal healthcare, give everybody healthcare in this country, the United States government says we don't have the money. They gave $768 billion to the Pentagon. They just gave billions of dollars to Ukraine. But when we ask for those simple, tangible things that we need in life, we're told they don't have the money. And I hope everyone is really paying attention to this. And this is why I tell people to focus on the money and where the money goes. Because if they really wanted to help the people, they would do so. They don't want to. They don't want to really get people out of poverty. What they do is they give us just enough to get by. They don't give you enough so that you can get out. And I think that that's incredibly important to pay close attention to. I'm really concerned in reference to the crisis with Ukraine and Russia, because I'm seeing so many people, especially on social media. Now, all of a sudden, everybody hates Russia. Now, all of a sudden, everyone says they stand with Ukraine. And everyone's like, yes, I love Ukraine. I'm like, you didn't love them 2 years ago. You only love them now because mainstream media told you to. They even had the Academy Awards with these talking points as well. Like everybody's in on it. Hollywood actors, musicians saying, yes, this is who you need to support. But if you talk to most people, they don't really know the details about this conflict. They don't understand that this has been an issue for the past 8 years. And most people are not going to look further than that. They're just going to believe what they see on mainstream media. And I think if you stand with the people in Ukraine, and if you care about the people in Ukraine, then you should also be concerned about people in Yemen, Somalia, Afghanistan, Haiti. They don't want to talk about that. It seems like to me, we only really care about people abroad when it's not people of color abroad, or when it's beneficial for the United States government. And I think that's important for people to know. We're not what you call the good guys here. There really isn't a good guy in this situation. The United States, Russia, Ukraine, we all have our flaws in this. But the United States is only involved because of resources. That's usually why we always get involved. Why were we in Afghanistan? Resources. So this is why I'm against U.S. intervention. I'm against imperialism. The United States government gets involved in these countries, and the people in those countries are worse off than they were before we got involved. And I think Afghanistan is a perfect example of that right now. It's incredibly sad, and no one seems to really care.
Yeah. Our establishment only cares about victims when they're in the crosshairs of so-called U.S. adversaries. So, like Jimmy Carter's national security advisor said, the goal of the policy is in Afghanistan at the time, is to bleed the Soviet Union. And that's what Hillary Clinton was saying on MSNBC, that yes, we should be sending arms to Ukraine to bleed the Soviet Union. They don't care if more Ukrainians and Russian people will die because of this. So it's not compassion motivating these policies. It's something else.
And
Jill,
I want to just,
sure.
Oh, sorry. I want to add something really quick that I was talking about last night. Ro Khanna was just on MSNBC saying that the plan is to bring Russia's economy to its knees. I don't understand why people are cheering this on. This is not okay. There are people in Russia who are just residents there. They have nothing to do with this conflict. They're just trying to live their everyday life. And here we have mainstream media commentators cheering this on for those people to suffer and struggle.
Yeah, exactly right. And the sanctions, which are embraced by like more humanitarian, like Democrats or whatever, these sanctions, they hurt more than Vladimir Putin or Russian oligarchs. They hurt regular people. They hurt poor people. They hurt single parents, the elderly, the sick. They hurt poor people here in the US at the gas pump and US consumers. So it's poor people all over who get hurt by these sanctions the most. But it's like the Democrats and both parties who like push them. So it's very sad and disappointing. Jill, we are working on a rally, a standout on April 22nd, which is Earth Day. And a lot of us have been talking about how these Earth Day events, a lot of times, sometimes they don't talk about the connection between militarism and imperialism. So we're holding a rally outside Park Street on April 22nd at 1 p.m., which I invite everyone to attend, by the way. And one of the themes of the event is going to be how destructive the U.S. imperialism and militarism is to the planet and to all of us. Jill, can you talk more about that, our plans?
Yes. And, many of us are feeling like we are all at risk. The Earth is at risk right now, not only from climate change, but also from war, and in particular from nuclear weapons and the incredible potential for this war to go nuclear. And, 90 million people would die within like an hour or two, and everybody else over the coming year, basically, from nuclear winter and, from all the dust and debris kicked up into the atmosphere, even from a small and limited exchange of nuclear weapons. So we're thinking we're coming up on Earth Day. How can we allow the war and the potential for nuclear annihilation to be left out of Earth Day? This is absolutely critical to the future of the planet and the people on it. So we're hoping to really expand the scope of what the future of the planet is. It's not only the climate, and it very much is the climate. Nothing can diminish the critical emergency of the climate, but it's also war and nuclear weapons. And with that, the weapons industry, with that, the fossil fuels, and that the military is the largest consumer of fossil fuels, the biggest emitter, that is, of any non-government entity. It is the number one emitter, and it's bigger than most government entities as well. You know, it may be something like, I don't know, 25 or something. I'm taking a stab at that, but you know, it's not low down. You know, the military is a huge emitter and destroyer of the planet. So for all of those reasons, we need to be intersectional. We also need to be intersectional because if we allow ourselves to be divided, we are allowing ourselves to be conquered. It's very important for these movements to work together whenever we can. And so we're thinking Earth Day is a wonderful opportunity, and we're calling it an Earth Day rally for people, planet, and peace over profit, because all four components of that are absolutely critical to our survival. If the profit motive and disaster capitalism, or the rapacious oligarchy, or whatever you want to call it, if that is allowed to rule the day, the planet doesn't have a chance, not from war, not from war profiteering and the sale of weapons, which dictates our foreign policy, you know, not for climate change, not for this crushing inequality, which is a disaster for people all over the world and in the United States. So the profit issue is critical here, and so is the status of people and whether we have an economy we can survive in, a healthcare system, allow a younger generation, well, several of the younger generations ever to escape from debt, an economy that works for everyday people, as well as the climate. So we thought, let's do this all together. And in fact, this is part of a larger effort, which is rolling out across the country. It's called the Earth Day Strike 2022.org. That's the website for it, earthdaystrike2022.org. And the idea is focus on whatever is important locally, but build collaboration and build solidarity across movements at the local basis and nationally to the extent that we can. The idea here is also that we need a general strike and the capacity for general strike before we get out of here. We're going to need to be able to do that. We can't do that now. We've sort of lost the ability to strike. Many people don't know how you even begin preparing to strike. So the idea is we're using this concept of a strike, an Earth Day strike, to support those strikes that are ongoing, like your neighborhood Amazon or Starbucks or teachers union. There are groups who are striking, and this is an opportunity to support them. And it's an opportunity to begin to lay the groundwork for striking in the future. But the idea is that we need to bring the wheels of destruction to a grinding halt. And those wheels of destruction are not only ecological, they're also economic, and they are also environmental. So Earth Day, we're supposed to step back and look at the big picture. So let's look at that big picture. And Sabby, I only recently learned that you're in Massachusetts, so we're going to have you come in and be a part of this. But people who are listening out there, you can go to earthdaystrike2022.org, and there's a map and a calendar and so on. You can see if stuff is happening near you. And if it's not, just create your own speak out. We've been really amazed since Amar and I thought, well, hey, let's do this in Massachusetts. Let's have a Massachusetts version. And we found all kinds of people. Many in the student climate strike movement have been hurting for a place to put their energy because for a variety of reasons, their organizations kind of got a little bit off track, and it's not clear that something is really being organized. You look around and you see a lot of stuff on Earth Day that's being sponsored by banks, so it's like trash pickups. That's not going to fix the problem. And if the banks are allowed to chart the course here, we're in big trouble. The banks are kind of the common denominator here between Wall Street, fossil fuels, and the war profiteers. So they all need to be brought into the picture here, and that's part of the transformative change that we're calling for. There's a URL for the Mass Peace Action site, which we're doing in Boston, and there's an agenda there. We're not just having a parade. This isn't just a feel-good event. This is about really pushing for specific solutions to each of these crises. They are solvable. They want us to think that they are not solvable, because if we're hopeless, then we're powerless. But if we, understand our power, then there's enormous reason for not just hope, but really for the power to make change.
Great, thanks so much, Jill. And Brian Garvey shared in the chat the link to that rally. So that's happening on April 22nd at Park Street Station in Boston at 1 p.m. So people come by if you're available and free that day. Sabrina, if you're available and free that day, we'd welcome you to come speak. You don't have to answer now. We can talk more later. But yeah, so and Sabrina, if you have a link to your podcast, feel free to put it in the chat. I'm going to send a follow-up email to everyone who registered for this event with different information, including the link to Sabrina's podcast. So I'd encourage people to check it out. It's very informative and entertaining, I think. So, we actually have to wrap up at 6:30 because Sabrina is going to be doing her news coverage on the podcast later. So people can check her out there. So I think what we'll do is I'll ask both of you one more brief question and then give you guys final words. And then maybe Dean can close us off with a closing song. So just one question. This is just something I'm curious. I like asking people in these forums. What are you guys reading right now? Or what are some of your favorite books? Or what is something you plan to read at some point? Sabrina, do you want to go first?
Sure. One of my favorite books is The Tipping Point by Malcolm Gladwell. I highly recommend his work. And the reason why I like that book is because Malcolm Gladwell focuses on how one small issue can snowball into several other issues. And one of the cities that he focuses on is Baltimore. And he talks about how drugs came into the city of Baltimore and how everything just snowballed after that. The AIDS epidemic, the job losses, poverty increased. And so I highly recommend that you read The Tipping Point. I think that's one of his best books, in my opinion.
Thanks, Sabrina. And how about you, Jill?
Let's see. Well, I am guilty of being such a news junkie that I never get through my daily list of what I'm trying to keep up with. I'm also a science junkie, and I read PubMed, which is the National Library of Medicine, and I get very geeky about nutrition and health and pollution and stuff like that. So I'm sort of guilty of maybe being too specialized, and I'm not reading books like I should. But I'll tell you, I'm watching a lot of really, really great podcasts and YouTube presentations, and I've only just gotten turned on to Oliver Stone's material, which I want to really highly recommend. And I'm one person who was also guilty of not paying attention to the JFK issues. And I happened to hear a podcast with Oliver Stone, who made a second movie, which is much more of a documentary about JFK, and it has blown me away. And so I'm sort of resolved to, do some more reading about that.
Yeah, and my friend Marty Schultz and I, we started a JFK working group at Mass Peace Action where we're interested in issues like that. If anyone's interested in joining that, they can email me. Okay, so what was I going to say? Oh yeah, by the way, Jill, I told somebody that in our April 22nd rally, Jill Stein might sing a song, and they were like, wow, she's so like multi-talented, like presidential candidate and medical doctor, and she sings. So I just found that out recently. Okay, so I want to give both of you like last closing words, and then Dean can close us off with the song. So Jill, do you have any, this was a quick little check-in. There's so much more I want to talk with both of you about, but we all have very busy schedules. So thank you so much everyone for your time today. Jill, are there any final closing words you want to leave us with?
I'll just, leave with the big picture, which is that, the the sort of theme tonight was about the role of media and in politics. And media is such a glaring, toxic soup right now. I just really want to underscore how grateful I am to Sabby. And there are a number of, just really awesome independent journalists, Aaron Mate, Glenn Greenwald, Consortium News, Mint Press. I could Breakthrough News, Richard Wolff, Democracy at Work, so on. I'm leaving a lot of people out, but they are so critical. And I think there are so many of us that are really, hanging on a thread. And of course, the Revolutionary Blackout Network is part of that. I feel like you provide us with daily therapy and kind of daily nurturing so that we can do a reality check and know that this anguish we're experiencing is not just us, that the time is really out of joint right now. And we are being disinformed, we are being psyoped. And it's really important to do that reality check because it's very empowering to just help us connect with our values, our vision, and each other. And that's a service that you are doing for us. So I really encourage people to get out and support the Revolutionary Blackout Network, as well as Mass Peace Action, of course, Community Church and others, who are they're really keeping us alive in body, mind, and soul. Thank you.
Yeah, that's right. Thanks, Jill. And I'll send a follow-up email to everyone here right now and everyone who registered who couldn't be here. It'll include the video of this webinar discussion. It'll include links to Sabby's podcast and Revolutionary Blackout Network podcast, and the link to our April 22nd rally in Boston, so people can join us if they want. Yeah, Sabrina, do you have any final closing words you want to leave us with?
I definitely encourage people who still want to do things through electoral politics. I want to ask you to shift your focus for a little bit and focus more on a local level when it comes to electoral politics. So this question comes my way a lot. What about those of us that still want to be active in politics? You can do a lot more on the local level when it comes to implementing change. For example, running for city council. City council controls the budget. That's an important position. It's an unpaid position, but it's an important position. It's running for mayor. Pay attention to what's going on with the governor. There's a gubernatorial race should be coming up pretty soon because I know Governor Baker is deciding not to run again. So pay attention to what's going on the local level. Massachusetts is a ballot initiative state. Think about all the things that we've passed in the state just through ballot initiatives alone. I wish we would have passed ranked choice voting. Unfortunately, that one did not come through. But for those of you that still want to focus on the political level, I want you to try to shift your focus to local politics if you want to implement change. And other than that, I really think at the end of the day, we have to get people out in the streets. The civil rights movement was not done through electoral politics. I think this is important to remember. So I think we really need a mass movement of people in this country to come together in order to implement change.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Sabrina, and thank you so much, Jill, and everyone for joining us. So again, I'll send a follow-up email with this video and a bunch of resources and links for Sabrina's podcast if you are interested in hearing more. So yes, let's close us off with the closing song from Dean Stevens.
Let me get close here and thank Mass Peace Action and thank my longtime friend Jill and my new friend Sabrina. It was great to be with you. I want to tell you about the book that I just finished that I couldn't put down. It's called Injustice, The Story of the Holy Land Foundation 5 by Miko Peled. And it is a story of injustice on a huge scale in this country. 5 successful Palestinian businessmen who started the biggest Islamic charity in the United States, and who in the aftermath of 9/11 got pegged with Hamas and all that stuff, and got put in jail for many, many decades. And their children and their grandchildren are the ones suffering. But they're my vote. I'm going to take it to our board of Community Church for our Sacco and Vanzetti Award for this year. There's a process to figure out, but the parallels to Sacco and Vanzetti are uncanny. It's just incredible. Immigrants pegged with something communist, Marxist, anarchist, terrorist. Anyway, here's my song to say goodbye to everybody and thank you to Mass Peace Action. And join us at Community Church this Sunday. We have a bunch of young Afghan filmmakers. Men of anger, men of war, my heart is filled with love. Tell me what you are fighting for. My heart is filled with love. This death I see won't make me numb. My heart is filled with love. Every boy, mother's son. My heart is filled with love. Raise your voices, spread the news. My heart is filled with love. Buddhist, Christian, Muslim, Jews. My heart is filled with love. They all teach the golden rule. My heart is filled with love. Do unto others that you've had them do. My heart is filled with love. I will not fear these foreign tongues. My heart is filled with love. There is a place for everyone. My heart is filled with love. I cannot make their will my own. My heart is filled with love. Fear can turn a heart to stone. My heart is filled with love. I do not know my neighbor's name. My heart is filled with love. I love that stranger just the same. My heart is filled with love. Hope is rising from this place. My heart is filled with love. Divine wisdom, amazing grace. My heart is filled with love. Men of anger, men of war, my heart is filled with love. Tell me what you are fighting for. My heart is filled with love. Tell me what you are fighting for. My heart is filled with love. My heart is filled with love. My heart is filled with love.
Great. Thanks, Dean. Thanks, Sabrina. Thank you, Jill. Thank you, everyone, so much for joining us. Everyone, please have a great evening.